Speaking of dangerous, let's talk about Labor's so-called misinformation laws that will compel social media companies to crack down on anything the media regulator deems misinformation. Now, the government has had so much negative feedback on this proposal that they've announced the bill will be delayed until next year, giving them time to make a series of changes to the draft legislation. Chris, one of the concessions that Labor are apparently considering is an exemption for religious views. Is that good, or is that just tinkering with a shocking bill that just should be scrapped completely? Forget about tinkering around the edges.
As you were introducing it, so they've delayed it till next year. I thought to give themselves more time to come up with some misinformation about the misinformation bill. I think scrap the bill. An entirely horrible idea. And if anybody's got any doubts about how bad this legislation is, think about what happened during COVID. I know there hasn't been enough attention on it. I know it hasn't got enough media attention, but we've reported it here on Sky and in the Australian newspaper. More than 4,000 social media posts during COVID were targeted secretly by our federal government to be drawn down. And they tried to get the social media companies to take them down, not all successfully, but 4,000 tweets and Facebook posts that our government tried to, and some of them were so controversial they said, you know what, when you get vaccinated, you can still catch the disease and pass it on. In other words, the facts. So we had terrible secret censorship in this country during COVID. You can't give that same power to an even broader array of government authorities.
This is the problem is that the definition of misinformation is so broad. How do you define it? Because if you're an individual, you're in your own house and you're putting something on social media, you're putting something online, then these laws basically can come at you and say, that is misinformation.
It's blasphemy laws.
And we know
blasphemy laws. It is totally blasphemy. And I worry it risks the freedoms that it aims to protect.
Danica, the ironic thing about what you've just said is one of the reasons the government have said they're going to delay this bill is they need to better define misinformation and disinformation.
That's right. You know, I mean, what about the misinformation that comes from government?
Well, they're exempt from it according to this legislation. That's one of the clauses in this misinformation disinformation bill, is that the government are not subject to the same thing us mere peasants sitting at home on social media are. That's one of the flaws of this. Another flaw, if you read the legislation, is private messaging, private emails, all of these different things. The government can literally go into messages if it's on like a WhatsApp thing, because technically, even though it's a private message, it's on this. There are so many bad areas of this law, and how do you police it? And for all the people who sympathise with this and go, we got to scrap out misinformation and disinformation, they are blasphemy laws, and one day every single person who's this protected class will be on the other side of that.
The scary thing about this, right, Joe, I'm reading the Sydney Morning Herald article about this, and then I looked at the comments, and you would be amazed at how many comments were cheering, being upset that religious people might be given an exemption. There's a lot of people who would love these laws to get rid of people they don't like.
I think this is part of a really kind of quite ugly new kind of elitism that is creeping up in society, where you have a sort of it's basically the teals, where you have an educated or tertiary educated, whether they're actually smart is another question, but an upper middle class, wealthy, affluent, overwhelmingly white, you'll notice, a class of people who think that everything they know, they're more educated than everybody else, they know more than everybody else, and anyone who disagrees with them is just stupid and not educated enough. And we saw that response come out very, very clearly when the Voice referendum went down, much to Chris and I's dismay.